and welcome to Media7. I'm Russell Brown. In this week's program, we explore the political lie. What is it and why is it uttered? And is it always a bad thing? But first, Sam Mulgrew has the source.
The journalism media belt is losing inches, but shares in salvation futures are surging. News bulletins throughout the world spread the rapturous word, the message from a man who has claimed in the past that Al-Qaeda's 9/11 attacks were a sign of the devil infiltrating churches. 89-year-old Californian Bible thumper, the broadcaster Harold Camping, seems a caricature for Roald Dahl's BFG, but he doesn't collect dreams, he disappoints them. The co-founder and president of the massive family radio network, broadcasting his weighty religious talkback show in 30 languages over 150 radio and television stations, is heard from Miami to Manila, Moscow to Melbourne. Despite Jesus saying in the book of Matthew, "Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour," and centuries of infamous rapture date-setting embarrassments, including the great disappointment of 1844, millions were once again led astray by just one man. But this time, he said, the Bible guarantees it. There is no plan B, he boasted to media. He and his followers spent a reported $100 million preaching the end, and many of his supporters spent their life savings on billboards. Then, due to low cloud or perhaps a GPS glitch, Jesus did not relieve hundreds of millions from the mortal coil, and the rest of us 6 billion will not witness God undoing his 7 days' work, at least until October 22nd. That's Harold Camping's new rapture date.
Sam Mulgrew there, no saving that young man. Now, misleading the House is supposed to be the great parliamentary sin, and yet we more or less assume that elected MPs will mislead us. Perhaps we even want them to. Jose Barbosa has some greatest fibs.
So don't stop believing in what we stand for.
It's sometimes difficult to observe any difference between the unrestrained phone order pitchman and the effusive politician.
A day of reckoning for the Iraqi regime, and that day is drawing near.
Like a piggery built on a growth hormone reservoir, the dry-full war tends to produce the biggest porkies. The American administration sold the Second Iraq War pretty much solely on the evidence that Saddam Hussein was building scary weapons.
His regime has the design for a nuclear weapon, was working on several different methods of enriching uranium, and recently was discovered seeking significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
At the same time, Bush's sauna mate Tony Blair was working the same angle. The Iraq dossier was a document produced for journalists by the Blair government. It presented intelligence that seemed to show evidence that Iraq was making weapons of mass destruction. It was ultimately used to justify the government's involvement in the war, although Blair and his then head of Flim Flam has spent the last 9 years downplaying its importance.
People talk about it being the case for war. It was not the case for war. It was the case why the Prime Minister had become more concerned.
But we now know otherwise, thanks to a statement given to the Iraq inquiry by a former Ministry of Defence official.
During the drafting of the final dossier, every fact was managed to make it as strong as possible. The final statements, reaching beyond the conclusions intelligence assessments would normally draw from such facts.
Anyone can lie, but it takes a true artist to come out appearing clean once people have noticed the nappy's full.
At the time we thought he had weapons of mass destruction. It turns out he didn't, but he had the capacity to make weapons of mass destruction. But I also talked about the human suffering in Iraq.
Straight-out denial is a favourite of our members of Parliament when forced to account for past indiscretions. In 2005, David Benson Pope was accused of classroom rough and tumble.
He put a tennis ball in my mouth to keep me quiet. Obviously, with a tennis ball in your mouth, you're very quiet.
I find such allegations ridiculous and I refute them.
In the same year, Don Brash, the then National Party leader, initially denied it had anything to do with an anti-Greens pamphlet distributed by the Exclusive Brethren.
Do you know who's responsible for it?
I don't. We've had nothing to do with this at all.
Brash was painted by his opponents as the sort of politician who'd lie at the drop of a hat if it kept him out of trouble.
I said nothing which was untrue. The Exclusive Brethren have told me some time back that they were thoroughly fed up with this government and they would be distributing some pamphlets.
And there are many more examples of trouser combustion in our halls of power. In fact, it's assumed that Parliament's so full of fork-tongued fabricators, it makes Mos Eisley look like the Pons Institute. So, if that's true, why do they do it? And why, like the recidivist infomercial purchaser, do we keep coming back for more? In other words, are we a nation of political self-harmers?
Don't stop believing in what we stand for. What we stand for. Don't stop.
Jose Barbosa there with what is hopefully not the next planking craze. UC Berkeley's Dr. Martin Jay literally wrote the book on political lies. It's called The Virtues of Mendacity on Lying in Politics. Media7's Sarah Daniel asked him just what he meant by virtue.
Well, politics is an enormously complicated system, game, series of protocols, series of maneuvers, so that there's no simple formula that I can give you. But I would say that often there are circumstances where the consequences of lying are, in some sense, justifiable. This is not to say that one should lie easily or that one should lie without a bad conscience or that one should lie as a norm. I think the norm of politics is still truth-telling. But there are moments when there are conflicting imperatives, either moral or practical, which may necessitate at least the stretching of the truth or the varnishing of the truth or maybe every so often an outright lie.
Do you agree that there is more lying in democracies than in dictatorships because elected politicians need the support of the public to go to war, for example?
Well, the typical version of dictatorship, or certainly totalitarian dictatorship, is that it resorts to the so-called big lie, in which an entirely fabricated alternative world is substituted for the ugliness of reality. And this is a kind of lie that either is believed or cynically used to manipulate a population that has no access to the truth. So to that extent, I would say dictatorships, or certainly totalitarian dictatorships, are more prone to basic and all-encompassing lies. Democracy is a system that I would define as a system that is adversarial and pluralistic, a system in which power plays a great role, obviously, in which people struggle for power to get their ideas and their interests across. And in that struggle, the truth sometimes is sacrificed in the name of winning support, in the name of creating coalitions, in the name of somehow allowing people to believe something that may not be the case. So that there are, instead of the big lie, there are lots of little lies, half-truths, lots of evasions, lots of spin in the realm of democratic politics. And there's also, and this is what makes democratic politics sometimes less naive than that earlier description might suggest, there's also a meta-level understanding of that. That is to say, citizens in a democracy are aware of the fact that politicians are, on some level, always stretching the truth for their own purposes. So that, for example, when a coalition occurs, when a group of people come together and claim that they share common values and interests, we almost always know that there is a kind of phoniness in the proclamation of absolute unanimity.
And yet, the media, when they get the whiff of a lie, they're onto it. I'm
glad that you brought the media up, because we might argue that politics, although isolated to a certain extent, is in dialogue with and interpenetrated by several external discourses which are more truth-telling, more veridical. One of them is scientific. Another is the juridical discourse of a legal system in which you're sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And the third would be the fourth estate of the media. And in a free democracy, in a society in which the media is not controlled by any one group, we have at least the hope that the media can give us access to conflicting evidence and can give us the ability to tell when a politician is fibbing and when he or she is not. So even though, as we know from experience, journalism is not by any means pure and without its own hypocrisies and compromises, it serves an absolutely crucial purpose in challenging politicians, challenging all of us to be honest under many circumstances. But here, too, there are counterexamples. I mean, certainly the media at times has been willing to be silent and maybe even to use cover-up stories if politicians deemed it absolutely necessary in the national interest, for example, when there is perhaps something in the diplomatic field or even the military field that has to be kept quiet. Sometimes the private lives of politicians have been kept under wrap out of a certain sense of discretion and a certain sense that the public doesn't have the right to know everything. So journalism, I think, often will pay heed to the necessity of a certain, let's say, opacity, if not full transparency.
Is honesty ever a political virtue?
I would say yes. There are many instances when the courage to be honest is something that we admire. And if it does serve a really good purpose, I mean, I'm always, in a way, a consequentialist in politics. If it serves a good purpose, then I think honesty is indeed the best policy. But this is always circumstantial. And there are times when one has to at least withhold, if not, in a way, swerve from the truth. But there are many cases when telling the truth to the population or telling the truth even to one's adversaries can be definitely justifiable. And, it certainly is commensurate with the value that we as individuals have, the moral value of always being honest. So in some ways, it's probably less of a strain than it is when you have to tell a lie.
Sarah Daniel speaking there to Dr. Martin J, who I should note looks about 20 years younger in the picture on his personal website. That may be a virtuous lie. After the break, the interviewer, the media consultant and the speechwriter.